I'm Callie Brenner, 26, the youngest cousin in a very outdoorsy, very loud family. The first thing I noticed was the cooler, blue plastic, wide open, and completely untouched. It sat on the edge of the campground table like a reminder that no one had expected me to be there because no one had packed anything for me. "Didn't think you were actually coming," my cousin Troy muttered, half laughing, half chewing a granola bar. His voice carried through the pine trees, bouncing off the stillness like it didn't matter how it landed. I stood next to my dad's rusted old truck, gripping my sleeping bag like it might explain why I had shown up uninvited. The air smelled of cedar and ash. Someone had already started a fire. A few heads turned, but most looked away just as quickly. My Aunt Sheila was passing out hiking maps, all ready in her fleece vest and visor like a seasoned ranger. Uncle Joe adjusted his bear spray holster with dramatic flair, and there I was, in jeans that weren't quite warm enough and boots that still looked too clean. "Hey, did you bring your meds?" someone asked from the folding chairs. I couldn't tell if it was concern or sarcasm. Probably both. "She shouldn't be alone if something happens," Troy said louder this time, tossing the granola wrapper into the fire pit. "You know, in case she has one of her things." My chest tightened. I didn't move. "I'm fine," I said. I meant it. But I wasn't sure I believed it yet. Aunt Sheila gave a loud sigh, then smiled that tight, sharp kind of smile she uses when she doesn't want to argue in public. "Callie, sweetheart, I just think maybe you'd be more comfortable staying back at the lodge with Mom. This is a pretty advanced trail. Elevation, river crossings. It's not a joke." Dad cleared his throat, but didn't speak. He didn't even look at me. I swallowed hard. "I drove 4 hours. It's not about effort," she replied gently. "It's about safety. We just don't want to be responsible if responsible." I cut in. "You're not responsible for me." That was the moment everything around me seemed to go quieter. The wind dipped low through the pines, the fire crackled, and behind me, someone stepped out from a black SUV. It was Ranger Dalton. He wasn't family. He was the senior trail guide for the park, and kind of a legend around these parts. Every cousin had a story about hiking with him, or learning compass skills at one of his workshops. He had that heavy-browed, flannel shirt presence that made you straighten your spine. He walked over with a radio clipped to his vest and a clipboard in hand. "Is there a Callie Brenner here?" he asked, scanning the group. Everyone turned. No one answered. I raised my hand slowly. "That's me." He smiled. "Thought so? I read your wilderness navigation essay. You're the one who scored top in the conservation competition last year." Now heads were really turning. "That was you," whispered one of my cousins. Ranger Dalton nodded. "Didn't know you were related to this crew. I came to invite you to co-lead the hike. We need someone familiar with the back route in case the West Pass floods. You're certified." "Right." I nodded. "Yeah, I am." The clipboard lowered. "Well," he said, glancing at the stunned faces around me, "looks like we've got our rescue lead." A strange silence settled over the campsite. I could feel it in the way no one moved. The way Troy stopped chewing. I didn't look at him. I didn't look at anyone. I just felt it. The shift. The crack in their certainty. And for the first time all morning, my hands stopped shaking. If you've ever been told you're too fragile, too slow, too much trouble to bring along, drop a comment or let me know where you're watching from. Hit like or subscribe if you've ever walked into a room full of people who underestimated you and left them speechless. Ranger Dalton handed me the map and gave a nod. "We head out at first light," he said. "Hope the others can keep up." The fire popped loudly and no one laughed. That's when I felt it, every gaze shifting. the weight of assumptions peeling off me like bark in the sun. And the silence. It was better than applause. No one said anything as I rolled out my gear beneath the smallest pine. The silence wasn't kind, but it wasn't mocking anymore. It was uncertainty, a kind of recalibration. Like the entire campsite had to update its idea of who I was, and no one knew what to say without sounding stupid. My dad finally came over, his hands buried in the pockets of his faded windbreaker. "You okay?" he asked, voice low. "Yeah," I said, brushing pine needles off my mat. "You gonna help me pitch this tent or just supervise?" That made him chuckle barely. But he did kneel down beside me and started driving stakes into the soil. I kept my eyes on the ground, measuring where the tent door should face, how level the surface was. If I focused on small tasks, I didn't have to think about how none of them had packed me any dinner, or how I'd been excluded from the planning group chats. I had emailed the ranger months ago on my own, signed up for the trail certification myself, bought the exact same boots Troy wore, just a different color. Still, none of that had been enough until Ranger Dalton showed up and dropped my name like it actually mattered. By the time night fell, the air had gone colder and sharper. I tucked my coat tighter around me and sat near the edge of the fire, not too close to the others. I didn't want their pity, and I wasn't interested in shallow apologies. But to my surprise, one of the younger cousins, Jamie, the quiet one who usually kept his face in a comic book, came over and sat beside me. "You really wrote that essay?" he asked, pulling a twig from the ground and twirling it between his fingers. "Yeah," I said. "On the Grizzly Corridor migration through the Southern Basin. You can read it online?" "I think that's cool," he murmured. "Everyone always talks about Troy like he's a survival expert, but he doesn't even know how to tie a real knot." I smiled at that. "It's just ego. He needs to be seen." "Don't you?" "No," I replied. "I need to be prepared." Jamie didn't answer, but he sat there a long time, poking holes in the dirt. His quiet presence felt more comforting than any forced apology could have. Later that night, I lay awake inside my tent, listening to the chorus of forest sounds, the rhythmic hoot of an owl, wind slipping between branches, the occasional pop of cooling coals from the fire ring. I thought about the fact that not a single person had asked to hike with me tomorrow. That was fine. They wouldn't want to be near me for the part that mattered anyway, the ridge pass where the trail split in two and only one path wasn't washed out. That's where Ranger Dalton said he'd meet me. That's where I could prove I knew the land better than anyone here. By morning, the sky was watercolor gray. Mist curled around the tree trunks like steam from a giant's breath. Breakfast was awkward. I ate dry trail mix and a protein bar while my aunt handed out scrambled eggs to everyone else. No one offered me any. Ranger Dalton arrived in a forest green truck just as we were tightening our packs. He was calm, collected, his voice low but commanding. People gravitated to him. Even Troy quieted down. He handed me a GPS and gave me a nod. "You good with the perimeter check before we cross the ravine?" "Yes," I said. And when I looked up, I caught Aunt Sheila watching me, not with disdain anymore, with caution. The hike started like most hikes do, long steps through uneven paths, everyone trying too hard to sound athletic. Lots of shouting about logs, roots, and hey, look at that. But as we climbed higher, the chatter thinned. The air grew colder, thinner. The slope demanded attention. About 4 miles in, we reached the ravine, the exact spot where last year's flooding had taken out the western route. Dalton stopped us, motioning for a break. I took a drink from my canteen and stepped aside, pulling out the map and GPS. This was the moment he'd warned me about. The detour was about 100 meters south, past a narrow outcrop. If you weren't trained, you'd miss it entirely. "Looks clear," Troy called out. We can just go through the main path. No, we can't, I said, sharper than I intended. The base is eroded. One wrong step and you're in the ravine. He smirked. Well, if the map girl says so. Map girl Ranger Dalton cut in, stepping toward him. She's here because she passed the floodplain navigation test. You didn't even apply. Troy didn't speak after that. We shifted course. The new route was tighter, but solid, safer. And somehow, I ended up near the front, next to Dalton, leading. The others followed. We camped again that night by a cold stream where the air smelled like rain and bark. I took out my small travel journal and made notes about the wildlife, pine beetle trails, a fox print near the edge of the clearing, things no one else had noticed. I felt something ease inside me just slightly, until the scream. It came in the middle of the night, long and high-pitched and awful. I shot up in my tent, heart pounding, grabbing for my flashlight. The campsite was chaos. People stumbling from tents, shouting names, flashlights sweeping over dark trees. I ran toward the sound and saw Jamie, his arm outstretched, his face frozen in terror, pointing toward the edge of the clearing. A bear. It stood maybe 30 feet from us, its dark shape massive against the night. Its breath visible in the beam of someone's light. It wasn't charging. Not yet. But it was too close. Curious. Hungry. Panic spread like wildfire. Everyone shut off your lights, I shouted. No one listened. Troy. I grabbed him by the arm. Turn it off. Stop looking at it. Dalton appeared beside me, but he didn't move. He whispered, You lead. You know this trail. What now? I swallowed hard. Back away slowly. I said, Everyone. No eye contact. No sudden moves. Drop anything with food in it. Still shaking. I stepped between Jamie and the bear. Slowly. Deliberately. My hand slipped into my jacket pocket and curled around the flare I'd packed days ago just in case. The bear shifted its weight. I felt my legs scream with fear. Callie, Dalton murmured. Now. I raised the flare, pulled the tab, and fire erupted from my hand in a violent hiss, lighting up the night like a torch from heaven. The bear roared, startled, then turned, and vanished into the trees. No one moved for a long time. No one spoke. Except Jamie, who whispered, She saved us. I didn't cry until later after the fire died down and everyone else had gone to bed. Their faces stunned and grateful. I sat by the dying embers, my hands still trembling, not from fear, from the release, from the realization that I had never been too weak. They just never gave me the chance to be strong. The next morning smelled like burned cedar and fresh silence. No one said it out loud, but the air felt different. Not just because the bear was gone, but because something had shifted in the group, like they'd all seen something they couldn't unsee. I woke before anyone else, brushing the dirt from my sleeves as I packed up camp. My fingers still smelled faintly of sulfur from the flare, a badge of proof. Dalton gave me a nod as he stirred his coffee near the tree line. You all right? He asked. Yeah, I said, though my voice came out a little hoarse. You. He shrugged. I've seen a lot of wildlife, but I haven't seen many people keep their nerve like that, especially not ones who've been pushed out of their own family circle. I didn't know how to respond to that, so I didn't. The rest of the group started waking, one by one. Most of them looked like they hadn't slept at all. Puffy eyes, stiff backs, a few dazed expressions. But no one spoke about the bear. They didn't have to. As we packed up and prepared for the descent into the southern valley, Aunt Sheila came up behind me. She was holding a thermos and a plastic bag of what looked like leftover oatmeal. Figured you didn't have breakfast packed, she said quietly. I blinked, then nodded. Thanks. She didn't meet my eyes, Jamie didn't stop talking about you. He said you stood between him and the bear. I did, I replied. She paused. We should have included you. I thought you'd slow us down. I was wrong. She left it at that. No grand apology, no hugging moment. But it was more than I expected, and honestly, more than I needed. We started the day's hike in single file. I found myself near the front again, not because I was trying to be, but because everyone seemed to naturally leave that space for me now. Even Troy. He kept to the back, mostly silent, occasionally muttering instructions to himself that no one listened to. I glanced over my shoulder once and saw him looking at me, not with anger, not with sarcasm, just looking. It was strange, feeling the group's attention shift from resistance to reliance. People started asking me questions about the trail, about local plant life, about signs of wildlife. It felt like I'd become some kind of reference point. By noon, we reached a small clearing with a panoramic view of the valley. The sky opened up into a brilliant wash of pale blue. Birds looped overhead, and the scent of pine gave way to the faint sweetness of wild flowers. We took a break there, everyone sitting on fallen logs or smooth rocks. I found a spot under a slanted tree and pulled out my compass. Jamie joined me again, this time with a notebook. Can you show me how to use it? He asked. The compass, I smiled and handed it over. Okay. First, hold it flat. Like it's a plate you don't want to spill. See that red needle? He nodded. That always points north. So if you want to find out where south is, just look directly opposite it. Now line that up with the direction of travel arrow. Jamie furrowed his brows, following my hands. Is this how you figured out where the detour was? Exactly. It's like reading the world's body language. Quiet clues. Things most people miss when they're too busy trying to lead with their voices. He scribbled something into the notebook. That's cool. Behind us. I heard Uncle Joe trying to start a fire with wet wood and giving up. Aunt Sheila was pacing near the edge, checking the GPS nervously. Storm's coming in tonight, Dalton called out. We need to reach base camp before dusk. We gathered our gear and started moving again, a little quicker this time. The trail narrowed into a serpentine path along the side of a steep slope. One wrong step and you'd tumble into bramble and rock. It was Jamie who slipped first. A small patch of loose gravel gave way beneath his foot. He yelped, his body tilting sideways, and I was just close enough to grab the back of his pack before he went over the edge. Got you, I grunted, digging my heels into the dirt. Dalton rushed over and helped stabilize us both. Jamie's face was pale, but he nodded quickly. I'm okay. Thanks. Callie. You sure? I asked. Yeah. Just scared me. The others slowed down after that. More careful. More silent. At the bottom of the trail, the base camp was tucked beneath a circle of tall trees, surrounded by jagged stone outcroppings and an old wooden shelter that creaked in the breeze. We got the fire going early this time, layering dry moss and bark under pine kindling. Dinner was quieter than usual. People actually shared food this time. Someone passed me a wrapped cheese sandwich. I didn't even see who. And then, unexpectedly, Troy spoke. Hey, Callie. I turned. He cleared his throat. I've been kind of a jerk. Everyone froze. I always thought you were just, too fragile. Because of the stuff before. The panic attacks. The meds. But I watched you last night. And today. And, honestly, you handled more than I did. My fingers tensed around my fork. It's okay, I said softly. I didn't need you to believe in me. I just needed space to prove myself. Troy nodded. Well, you did. A moment passed, then another. The fire cracked. Maybe next trip, he added. You should be in charge. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The firelight danced in his eyes, and for the first time in years, we were looking at each other like people, not just roles. Later that night, Jamie slipped me a folded piece of paper. Inside was a drawing he'd made. Me, holding the flare, standing between him and a shadowy bear with glowing eyes. "You're like a forest superhero," he whispered. I smiled, but I didn't feel like a hero. I felt like someone who'd finally been allowed to take up space. I slipped the drawing into my journal and lay back on my sleeping mat, staring up through the branches at the stars. Maybe it didn't matter how long they ignored me, or how many times I was told no. Maybe all it took was one moment, one bear, one flare, and a truth that couldn't be put back into the box. I woke to the sound of raindrops tapping gently against the roof of the old wooden shelter. Not a storm. Not yet. Just the kind of soft rain that makes the forest smell like memory. Damp bark, moss, the earth shifting quietly in its sleep. The others were still asleep. Jamie curled like a comma in his sleeping bag. Troy snored softly from the far end, his hoodie pulled halfway over his head. I pulled on my jacket and stepped outside into the mist. It was early dawn hadn't broken, but the sky was lightening to that soft steel blue that signals a new day. I walked past the extinguished fire pit, past the rope where someone had hung damp socks and gloves. The forest felt like it was breathing, slow and steady. I needed to move, to shake off the adrenaline that still clung to me like sweat, even after the bear was gone, even after they'd started treating me like I mattered. I took the west trail alone. Not far. Just a loop past the ridge where the pines grew taller and the wild mushrooms clustered in quiet communities beneath fallen leaves. I didn't bring a pack or a compass this time. I knew this area by heart. I sat on a boulder and watched the mist roll over the treetops like waves of ghosts, and I let myself feel it, the grief. Not for danger, not for the way they used to treat me, but for all the years I believed them, all the times I stayed home while they hiked, or stayed silent when they mocked me. Every time I skipped a family dinner because I couldn't bear to be the weak one again. I thought staying quiet was survival. But it wasn't. The real survival was this stepping into the storm anyway. A light crunch of boots behind me made me turn. It was Troy. He looked half awake, jacket zipped unevenly, eyes still puffed with sleep. "Didn't think you'd wander off," he said, voice lower than usual. I needed air. He looked at the trees. "It's nice out here. Kinda peaceful." We sat in silence for a while, neither of us knowing what to say. Then he broke it with something unexpected. "I always hated how Grandma used to compare us," he said. "You were the reader. I was the climber. She made it sound like we were pieces of a broken thing that never quite fit together." I looked down at my hands. "She told me once that you'd survive in the wild, but I'd only survive in books." Troy let out a breath, somewhere between a laugh and a groan. "She told me you were the smart one, said I'd never have what you had upstairs. I guess we both got sliced by the same blade, just in opposite directions." I didn't reply right away. The mist curled around our legs like smoke. "I don't need you to be sorry," I finally said. "I just want to stop feeling like a guest in my own family." He nodded. "Then maybe it's time we stop hosting the roles they gave us." I looked at him, really looked, and for the first time, I didn't see the golden boy or the loudmouth cousin or the one who always won the group over. I saw someone else trying to crawl out from under a label he never chose. "We should head back," I said. "Storm's coming." He stood, brushing off his pants. "Hey, Callie." "Yeah, I meant what I said, about the next trip." I smiled faintly. "We'll see." By the time we returned to camp, the others were packing up. Rain had made everything damp, but not miserable. Dalton was giving instructions. organizing gear into piles. The plan was to hike 3 miles out and meet the pickup truck at the ranger station before the heavier rain set in. As I tightened the straps on my backpack, Aunt Sheila approached again. She had that same uncertain look from the day before, but softer now. "I wanted to ask you something," she said. "Okay, we're thinking of starting a family survival skills weekend next spring, maybe for the younger kids. I thought maybe you'd like to lead it." I blinked. "You're serious?" "Of course I'm serious. You're the only one who knew how to read the terrain, the only one who kept their head." I glanced at Jamie, who was beaming at me from across the clearing. "Yeah," I said slowly. "I'd like that." She touched my shoulder briefly before walking off. And just like that, it didn't feel like I was on the outside anymore. Not fully. We hiked out in relative quiet, with only a few murmurs about footing or distance. The trail was slick, but not dangerous. The trees parted now and then to reveal glimpses of the valley, the distant silver thread of a river. I walked in the middle of the group, not hiding, not leading, just walking. When we reached the ranger station, the truck was already there. Engine running, heater blasting. People started tossing packs into the back, shedding their jackets, laughing about damp socks and sore feet. Dalton clapped me on the back. "You ever thought of going pro with this?" he asked. "Ranger certification, maybe even backcountry rescue." "Honestly," I said, "I used to think I'd never be strong enough. But now, yeah, I'm thinking about it." He gave a nod. "You've got what it takes. Just don't let people tell you who you are before you decide for yourself." We loaded into the truck. As the rain started falling heavier, I pressed my forehead against the window and watched the trees blur past. Jamie handed me his notebook. "Can you sign it?" he asked. I laughed. "You want my autograph now? You're the one who saved everyone." I took the pen, wrote a quick message. "The forest remembers the quiet ones." As we pulled away from the ranger station, I felt something loosen in my chest. A knot I didn't even realize I'd been carrying. I didn't get a medal. I didn't get a grand speech. But I got something better. I got seen. Not as a patient. Not as someone fragile. Just me. And that, finally, was enough. When we got back to town, everything felt smaller. The air didn't smell like pine anymore. It smelled like concrete, car exhaust, and wet pavement. The strip of shops on Main Street looked exactly the same: one dusty hardware store, a bakery that opened too late, and the corner diner where half the town's gossip got served with burnt coffee. My dad drove us home in silence. The radio stayed off. I sat in the passenger seat with my window cracked an inch, letting the cold breeze numb the tips of my fingers. He finally spoke just before we turned onto our street. "Your mom would have been proud." It hit me harder than I expected. I looked over, but he kept his eyes on the road. His hands tightened slightly on the wheel. "She always said you had your own kind of strength," he added. "Guess I just didn't see it." I swallowed. "You didn't want to." He nodded. "Maybe." We pulled into the driveway. Our house looked the same: shingled roof, crooked mailbox, that same stubborn oak tree that kept dropping acorns on the porch. I stepped out and immediately felt how quiet it was compared to the woods. Too quiet, almost artificial. Inside, the lights buzzed overhead. I dropped my pack by the stairs and went straight to my room. Everything in there was just as I'd left it. Books stacked sideways, half-finished sketches of trail maps on my desk, an unopened envelope from the community college I never applied to. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at it for a long time. There was a part of me that wanted to slip back into old patterns, shrink again, fold myself into the silence, pretend like nothing had changed, but something inside me had shifted, and it wouldn't let me disappear. That night, I took out my laptop and started researching ranger certifications. Not for anyone else. Not to prove a point. Just to give my instincts a place to live. I'd spent so long learning how to read a landscape to listen for danger, to find my footing in unstable places. Maybe that was a kind of intelligence no one ever gave me credit for. Maybe I didn't need their permission anymore. A few days later, Jamie texted me a photo. It was the drawing he'd made of me and the bear, now framed on his bedroom wall. Underneath it, he'd written in bold marker, "When everyone ran, she stood still." I smiled so hard it hurt. Then came the family group chat, the one I had been excluded from before the trip, the one where they used to plan every hike, every reunion, every so-called family bonding event. This time, I got the invite. The message came from Aunt Sheila. "Hey, Callie, can you lead the fire safety segment for the kids' nature weekend in April?" A pause. Then another message. "Also thinking of starting a monthly trail skills meetup. Want to co-host with Troy." I stared at the screen. Part of me wanted to laugh. Another part wanted to throw the phone across the room. Instead, I typed, "I'll think about it. Let me know when the dates are confirmed." Power didn't have to shout. Sometimes it could just say maybe and let them sit with it. That weekend, Troy showed up at my house unannounced. He brought two things: a dented camp stove and an apology loaf of banana bread he'd burned on one side. "You can keep the stove," he said, placing it on the porch like a peace offering. "I'm upgrading. Figured you'd need one for your solo trips." I raised an eyebrow. "You really think I'm gonna camp with you again?" Troy smirked. "I'm not assuming. I'm hoping." I leaned on the doorframe. "You want honesty? Always. I don't know if I trust you yet." "One apology doesn't erase years of crap." He nodded. "Fair. But I'll give you something." I added. "That moment at the boulder, when you admitted Grandma messed you up too, that was the first time I felt like we were on the same trail." Troy exhaled, rubbed the back of his neck. "I'm trying, Cal." "I know." He left the bread on the porch and walked away without asking to come in. I took it inside and ate the non-burnt half with tea. A week later, I got a call from Ranger Dalton. "We're opening up 2 volunteer roles for the spring prep season," he said. "You'd be helping catalog trail conditions and monitoring wildlife zones." I didn't even hesitate. "I'm in." "You sure it's not glamorous work?" "I don't need glamour," I said. "I just want the woods." He laughed. "That's what I like to hear." I started going up to the ridge every weekend. Sometimes alone. Sometimes with Jamie. He brought his sketchbook and snacks. I brought trail markers and a second GPS. One afternoon, we sat near a stream watching a heron land softly on a rock. Jamie asked, "Were you ever scared that night?" With the bear, I thought about it. "Yeah. Terrified. But you didn't look scared." "That's because I couldn't afford to show it." Sometimes, being the calmest person in the room is the only thing keeping everyone else together. He nodded, like he understood more than his age should allow. Then he said, "I want to be like that someday." I smiled. "You already are. You just haven't had your bear moment yet." As the seasons shifted, so did I. People started seeing me less as the fragile cousin and more as the one who knew things, not because I talked louder, but because I listened better. To wind, to footprints, to people's quiet pain. It's strange how fast a label can fall off when the right moment rips it loose. The family reunions got easier. Aunt Sheila stopped offering me granola bars with that pity smile. Uncle Joe actually asked me for advice on waterproof gear. And Troy, he invited me to co-lead a group hike for new dads and their kids. Said he wanted them to learn that strength wasn't just about muscle. I said yes. The trail we picked was the same one where the bear appeared. Jamie pointed it out with reverence when we passed the exact spot. No one spoke over him. They listened. The thing is, I never needed them to love me differently. I just needed them to look, to see who I already was. And now, when they talk about that trip, they don't talk about Troy's bear spray or Sheila's hiking spreadsheets. They talk about me. About the girl they said was too weak to come along, who stood between them and something wild, and didn't flinch. Spring came slow that year, like it wasn't sure if it was allowed to stay. The snow melted in patches along the edges of the forest first, seeping into the soil and making everything smell raw, rich, and alive. I spent most weekends in the valley now, volunteering with Dalton, marking the trails, clearing debris, tracking signs of bear migration across the ravine. No one asked if I was strong enough anymore. They just handed me the map. One Saturday, I met a woman named Lisette, new to the county, pale as bone, with long gray braids and a worn journal always tucked under one arm. She was part of a state research group documenting wildflower changes due to shifting water tables. We got paired up for a plant tag mission. She asked me, halfway through the second hour, "You work with family?" I shook my head. Sometimes. I used to trail with them, but I mostly hike solo. She crouched near a patch of milkweed, her fingers grazing the petals. I used to hike with my sisters. Until one trip, things changed. She didn't say more, but she didn't have to. There was something in the way she moved, a quiet that wasn't shyness, but self-preservation. I understood that kind of quiet. As we walked back toward the ranger shed, Lisette glanced sideways. "You have the stillness of someone who's been misunderstood. That's a skill, not a wound." I didn't respond, but I thought about those words for days. Weeks passed. My phone filled with texts from Sheila about planning the kids' survival weekend. Troy started sending me YouTube videos of new gear reviews. Jamie texted every Friday like clockwork. "Trail this weekend?" I said yes more often than no. Still, there were days I needed to walk alone. I'd head out early with a thermos and dried fruit, choose a less popular path, and just go until my legs burned and my breath fogged the air behind me. I didn't need noise to feel real anymore. I didn't need praise. I just needed the sound of wind moving through trees and the weight of moss under my boots. Sometimes, I brought my old sketchbook, the one I hadn't touched since high school. I'd sit near the edge of the ridge and draw the way light moved through fog, or the shape of deer tracks along the softened trail. One afternoon, I returned home to find a letter in the mail. It was from the State Park Authority, a recommendation form. Dalton had submitted my name for the Junior Ranger Training Initiative, a precursor to full certification. I read the letter twice, then again. The words blurred a little near the end, not because I doubted I could do it, but because for the first time, someone else believed I could too. That night, I sat with my dad at the kitchen table. He was oiling his old lantern, hands stained with soot and time. "You ever think," I asked, "that maybe some people were just born to be outside?" He looked up, surprised, like rangers, like watchers, listeners, people who track more than they speak. He set the rag down. "I think your mom was like that." I smiled. "I think so too." He looked down, then said quietly, "I kept something of hers. I didn't know if you'd want it." He got up, disappeared into the garage, and returned holding a faded canvas bag. Inside was a compass, old and scratched but still working. A patch sewn onto the strap read, "Brenner." "See." "Wait," I said. "This was hers." "Yeah. She had it when we met. Said it always pointed her home, even when she didn't know where that was." I traced the initials. "Same as mine. I want it." I whispered. I took it with me the next day on the trail. It didn't spin perfectly. Its needle stuck slightly before settling, but it felt right in my palm. That afternoon, Dalton called. We had a cancellation for next weekend's wilderness simulation, he said. You'd be navigating a lost hiker scenario with 2 others. You in? I didn't hesitate. Absolutely. The morning of the simulation, I met the 2 other volunteers, Erin, a med student with fast eyes and faster hands, and Marco, a recent army vet with quiet footsteps. We were given coordinates, fake distress signals, and a 30-pound pack each. It wasn't pretend. The terrain was real. The weight was real. The pressure very real. By hour 4, we'd covered a ridge, 2 creeks, and a section of forest where our GPS cut out. We had to switch to compass navigation. I pulled out my mother's. Erin looked over my shoulder. Is that one even accurate? It's not fast, I said, smiling, but it's faithful. We reached the marker, a staged injured hiker played by a park intern, and completed the rescue drill in record time. Dalton clapped us all on the back. That's the fastest I've seen this season. Brenner, nice work leading the last leg. It wasn't pride I felt. It was alignment. Later that week, Jamie came over to work on his wildlife badge. He needed to identify 10 native species and photograph evidence. We hiked to the lower grove and spotted elk droppings, owl feathers, and a coyote track so fresh it made us pause. Callie, he asked suddenly, are you scared of anything? I didn't answer right away. I knelt beside the coyote track and pressed my palm gently into the dirt next to it. I used to be scared that I'd always feel small, like no one would ever really see me. He nodded. I get that. But now I stood. I think I'm more scared of pretending I don't belong, just to make other people comfortable. He thought about that as we walked. Then he whispered, I hope I grow up like you. I looked at him. No, I said gently. Grow up like you. Just don't let anyone tell you who that is. We made it back before sunset. Jamie's mom picked him up, waving at me with a smile I hadn't seen from her in years. I stayed outside after they left, sat on the porch, watching dusk settle like a slow breath over the neighborhood. The forest was still out there, just beyond the hills, still breathing, still waiting. I didn't need to rescue anyone else to feel brave. I just had to keep walking forward. The day I officially became a certified wilderness guide, no one in my family even knew it was happening. There wasn't a ceremony, no cap and gown, no applause, just a laminated card handed over a fold-out table in a ranger station that smelled like pine cleaner and damp boots. My name was printed in block letters across the bottom. Callie Brenner, Registered Trail Guide, Western Region. I stared at it for a long time. It didn't feel like crossing a finish line. It felt like finally standing on a trailhead I wasn't afraid to walk alone. Dalton clapped me on the shoulder before heading out to brief the next group. You've got a good head, he said. You don't panic. You don't bluff. That matters more than you think. He paused in the doorway. Don't let them talk you into shrinking again. You're a damn fine leader. I didn't cry until I got back to the truck. Not because I was sad. Not even because I was overwhelmed. Just because something inside me finally let go. Like every quiet version of me, every girl who stood behind the camera. Every woman who didn't speak up in meetings. Every cousin they told to sit this one out had been walking behind me this whole time, waiting for me to turn around and say, you can come with me now. I drove home through fog, the road curving in and out of view, headlights cutting through patches of silver. When I pulled into the driveway, my dad was on the porch, fiddling with the latch on an old cooler. He looked up as I climbed out. Heard from Dalton? I raised an eyebrow. Yeah. He nodded. Said you passed with flying colors. Didn't want to make a fuss until you were back. He stepped aside and kicked open the cooler lid. Inside was a single cupcake. Vanilla, blue frosting, a little green plastic tree stuck in the top like a flag. It was small, a little wonky, but it was the first time anyone had ever marked something I'd accomplished. I sat beside him on the porch steps, breaking off a piece of frosting with my finger. "I'm not mad," I said. He looked at me. "About what? That no one came?" He was quiet for a moment. "You've always done things quietly, I think." We mistook that for weakness. It wasn't. I smiled. It was survival. After a few minutes, he said, "Your mother would have baked a whole cake. I think she would have come on the trip," I added. "She would have told them I belonged there." He didn't answer, just nodded, his eyes still somewhere far away. The next weekend, I got a message from Sheila. "Family hike Saturday. Hope you can join. Troy's leading the kids' station. Thought maybe you'd want to handle the backwoods route." I read it twice. The polite tone, the subtle shift, the unspoken acknowledgement. I replied simply, "I'll meet you at the trailhead." When Saturday came, I packed light trail markers, extra water, first aid kit, backup compass, my mother's, the one with the sticky needle. I clipped it to my belt like a charm. The trailhead was full of noise when I arrived. Laughter, zip jackets, the sounds of coolers being slammed shut and kids chasing each other through parking lot gravel. The same family chaos I'd grown up with. But this time, no one looked surprised to see me. Troy raised a hand in greeting. "Hey, Callie. You're on the map station with me." "Yeah, I'm taking the south route," I corrected. "Looping around through the birch grove. Should take about 2 hours." He nodded. "We'll radio if anything comes up." Aunt Sheila approached with clipboards and snacks. She offered me one of the laminated trail checklists. We split the groups advanced and beginner. Yours has a few of the older kids, Jamie included. "You good with that?" I gave her a look. She smiled. "Right. Of course you are." We set out 15 minutes later. My group included Jamie, 2 of Troy's nieces from out of town, and a wiry teenager named Connor who wore a hoodie that said "I'd rather be sleeping." They trudged along behind me, complaining about mosquito bites and mud. But as we climbed the ridge, their voices quieted. Jamie walked beside me. "This is the same trail as the bear." "Right. Different angle," I said. "But yeah, close." He pointed to a cluster of berry bushes. "You remember everything, don't you?" "Not everything." I smiled. "Just what matters." We reached the overlook by noon. I gave them 15 minutes to rest and passed around granola bars. Connor asked, "Have you ever gotten really lost once?" I said, "When I was little. Not in the woods. At a family reunion." They laughed. But Jamie looked at me, understanding. I stood, stretched, and gestured toward the south bend. "All right," I said. "Let's finish this loop. If we're lucky, we'll beat the rain." The sky was already darkening by the time we descended into the lower basin. The trees here were taller, closer together, the canopy almost thick enough to block out the light. The air felt different, heavier. I noticed it before they did. The sudden absence of birds. No chirps, no rustling, no wind. I stopped walking. Jamie bumped into me. "What is it?" I held up a hand. My eyes scanned the edges of the trail. Deep, wide prints, faint but recent, claw marks where bark had been peeled. I whispered, "Bear." Connor froze. "Are you serious?" I turned, voice steady. "We're not in danger, but we're in its territory. No running. Stay close. No talking unless I ask." I adjusted my pack, pulled out my flare, and clipped it to my waistband. "Callie," Jamie whispered. "Should we go back?" "No," I said. "It's safer to move forward now." Slowly. We walked in near silence for the next mile. Every crack of twig made them flinch, but no one panicked. They followed me, step for step, eyes locked on my back. We reached the forest's edge 20 minutes later, no bear, No sound. No panic. Just the woods letting us go. When we broke into the open field, Connor exhaled so hard he almost toppled over. "Are you kidding me?" he said, hands on knees. That was insane. Jamie looked at me like I'd just performed a magic trick. And I felt it again, that soft, hard-earned trust. We returned to the main camp and found the others already there. Troy raised an eyebrow when he saw my face. "You okay, fine?" I said. "Saw fresh tracks. Nothing close." He nodded. "You handled it." "Yeah. No praise. No applause. Just belief." That night, after the families left, I stayed behind with Dalton to help clean up. The fire was still smoldering, its glow low and warm. "You've come a long way," he said, handing me a coil of rope. "So is my family," I replied. He gave a soft laugh. "It's not easy. Changing your role in a place where people have already decided who you are?" "No," I said, tying the rope. "But sometimes all it takes is one fire, or one bear." Dalton nodded. "Or one woman who refused to stay home." The stars came out above us, quiet, scattered, unbothered by everything below. I sat on a log, watching the last ember fade into black. And for the first time, I didn't feel like the girl who had to prove herself. I felt like the woman who belonged because she made her own space. The next time someone asked if I wanted to go camping, it wasn't a test. It wasn't a reluctant offer or an afterthought scribbled in the margins of a family group chat. It was Jamie. He called one afternoon while I was sorting through field notes and preparing samples for Dalton's seasonal trail report. "Hey," he said, "I was thinking, before school starts, maybe we could do a short overnight hike. Just the two of us." He sounded nervous, like I might say no. I smiled, even though he couldn't see it. "Pick the trail. I'll bring the compass." We left 3 days later, just a single night. The same ridge trail we'd walked together months before, this time in reverse. It was drier now, full of insects and rustling grass. The air was hot, but not unbearable. Jamie was taller than I remembered. His pack looked lighter, and he didn't complain once. I let him lead the first stretch, and when he stopped too close to a wasp nest, I gently pulled him back without scolding. "You're learning," I said. "From the best." He grinned. We reached camp by dusk. I let him start the fire, watched as he carefully stacked the sticks into a small pyramid like I'd taught him, striking the flint until the spark caught on the dry moss. When the first flame came to life, he sat back, stunned. "Did it?" he whispered. I handed him a marshmallow. "You did." That night, lying beneath the stars, we talked about things we didn't normally share during big family events, about fear, about school, about what it means to not feel like you fit inside the space other people built for you. "You think I'm like you?" Jamie asked quietly, eyes fixed on the stars. I thought about it. "You're like you. But if you mean, do I think you'll grow up feeling too quiet, too observant, too much and not enough all at once?" "Yeah, I think you might." He was quiet a long time. "Is that bad?" "No," I said. "It's not bad. It's just lonely for a while." We watched a shooting star scratch across the sky, too fast to hold on to. When morning came, we packed up in silence, our boots rustling through the damp leaves as we headed back down the ridge. I let Jamie lead the way until we reached the fork, and without asking, he pulled out the compass. My mom's old one. I'd let him borrow it the night before. He turned it slowly, aligning north, reading the trail's direction with care. "You trust it?" I asked. "I trust me," he said. I felt something in my chest shift. He'd said it with so much certainty. We returned to town in time for dinner. His parents waved from the porch as I pulled up. They were different now, too. less wary, more open. I saw it in the way they nodded, the way they asked how it went without pretending they already knew better. I stayed on the porch as Jamie disappeared inside. I could hear him talking fast, explaining how he lit the fire, how he used the compass, how we saw deer prints and heard an owl call just after midnight. And then I heard it clear as a bell. She taught me. Callie did. No one corrected him. No one laughed. They listened. That night, I sat in my room with my old journal, flipping through sketches I'd made over the past year. The ridge, the bear, Jamie, trail markers. A drawing of my own hands holding the flare, light bursting between my fingers. I added a new page. Jamie, standing in a field of tall grass, compass in hand, sun rising behind him. I captioned it with the words he didn't know he'd given me. I trust me. The survival skills weekend came a month later. Sheila organized it, but she didn't micromanage. Troy brought gear, and for once, didn't try to lead. He just helped. And when a kid asked him what to do in a floodplain, he turned and pointed at me. Ask her. He said. She's the expert. I ran the tracking station, had them find signs of wildlife, broken twigs, fur on bark, small prints in the mud. Kids crouched beside me, whispering guesses, pointing, laughing. Their parents stood off to the side, watching. A little girl in a green windbreaker came up at the end and tugged on my sleeve. Were you scared of bears? Before she asked. I knelt beside her. Yes. And during. And even after. But you stayed. She said. I nodded. That's what being strong means. Sometimes. I said. Sometimes it just means showing up anyway. She grinned. I'm gonna be strong too. You could spend your whole life trying to erase the names people gave you: fragile, slow, complicated, too much, too little. But some part of you will always remember. And maybe that's okay, because those names don't disappear. They just get replaced. Later, when we all sat around the fire, I looked across the flickering flames and saw my family not as judges, but as people flawed, tired, trying. Some of them had hurt me. Some had ignored me. Some just didn't know how to love the quiet ones. But here they were, beside me, listening. And maybe that's what healing looks like, not forgetting what happened, but choosing to keep walking anyway. At the end of the night, Troy handed me a sealed envelope. What's this? I asked. Open it later, he said. Just when you're alone. I did. Inside was a photo from the trip, the Bear Flare moment, taken by someone's phone, grainy but real. Me standing between Jamie and the dark, flame in hand. On the back, he'd written, "They said you were too weak to come. Then you showed us all the way home." I held the photo to my chest, let myself cry again. Not because I was hurt, but because I wasn't. Not anymore.